Hey, I appreciate you guys tuning in. This is JT, and if you are hearing this, you have once again tuned into the Consequence of Habit podcast. Like always, this podcast is brought to you by our friends at Athletic Brewing. If you listen to last week's episode, I had on the founder, and I consider him a friend. So when I say this is brought to you by my friends, legitimately the guy who started the company. I'm excited. I'm excited about that. All right. These guys are doing great things. They've been huge in my journey. If you guys, if you want to drink a good beer, you don't want a hangover. You don't want all the detrimental health stuff that comes along with alcohol. You want to wake up and not have to apologize about shit you did the night before. And then do yourself a favor. Log on to athleticbrewing.com. See if they sell it to you locally. If they don't, just order it. Just order online. Matter of fact, I'm gonna help you out. Here's my promo code, capital COH20. That's gonna get you 20% off your first order. Guys, be kind to yourself. Drink good beer. Don't drink the alcohol. You're welcome. This week we have on Mr. Josh Duntz from Stasis. Josh is a breathing coach, and you may think you don't need a breathing coach. You may think you got your breathing all figured out, and I'm gonna say that you are probably wrong. You know, very few of us actually tap into the benefits of following a breathing regimen. You know, through talking to Josh, through doing some of my own research and actually trying this stuff out, you see these benefits. You see things like stress reduction, improved sleep, improved physical performance. And then on the flip side, some of the negative effects of things like shallow breathing or just breathing through your mouth. A lot of us, we just don't know. Josh started this journey of his shortly before getting out of the military. He learned about some breathing techniques through a friend, and it was just on the performance side. He was trying to improve physical performance. And as he's doing, he's starting to see all these other benefits. And it was at the perfect time. I mean, the guy was getting out of the military. He was going through a divorce. He was starting a new business. I mean, a bunch of stressful shit. And he saw how this thing was helping him along the way. And then he did what we should all do, is he took something that was adding value, making him a better version of himself, making him happier, and he started spreading the word. Hence, we have Stasis. So I'm going to let Josh tell his story. Please welcome to the podcast, Mr. Josh Duntz. All right, thanks for joining. This is JT here at the Consequence of Habit podcast. I am here with Josh Duntz from Stasis. Josh, I appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, so anyone who's heard some of my prior podcasts, there's a lot of times I talk about breath work. It's weird how much you're seeing it now. You're seeing it come up quite a bit. There was somebody, I don't know if it was James Nestor, somebody was on Rogan not that long ago talking about it. Obviously, the Wim Hof has done a really good job in marketing it and bringing it to a lot more people. This has changed, right? So in the beginning, this was more of like what I knew of it was, I've heard of it in the world of yoga and things like that. What's changed? Why is breath work coming to the forefront right now?
So I think there's a few different things at play there. I think the pandemic had a large influence in it, obviously. I think James Nestor's book had a big impact on it too. And both of those things coincided at the same time, really. So I think Nestor's book was released like at the beginning of 2019, pre-pandemic. And then a couple of months later, the pandemic started. And that's kind of where I really got into breath work from a business standpoint too, was post-pandemic. But yeah, I think those two things played a huge factor in it. And then I think secondary is what we see similar to with yoga and meditation is that breath work has been being talked about for a long time in the academic and scientific community. And it's very similar to like the path I saw with yoga and meditation, where it normally takes around 10 years or so for that stuff to kind of make it out of those small niche academic and scientific kind of marketplaces and make it into its mainstream. So we're just now, I think, kind of on the beginning edge of that transition to where people are starting to organically talk about it and, get into the mainstream. And obviously it's been really popular with like health and wellness and on the performance side for athletes. So yeah, I think the next 5 to 10 years is going to be, I think it's going to be like kind of the next biggest, I don't want to say trend because I hate that word because I don't think it's something that's going to kind of come and go like other, health or diets or stuff like that we see. But I think it's going to be a much bigger thing that people start to pay attention to and start to really incorporate into like their daily habits or programming or whatever they're doing for their kind of general health and wellness. So yeah, it's an exciting time to be in the space.
It's strange to see these two worlds. So I'm sure people that were in the circles where they're practicing meditation and yoga, and they've been doing that. Breath work is obviously something that they've been talking for a long time. But what interests me right now is we're seeing this blend of these two worlds, right? So you have this military side where that was. Maybe this is just my own head. In a lot of ways, the polar opposite of that yoga side. And I would say probably I think you probably have a better grasp of this. I would say the past 5 years, we've really seen this combining of these two worlds. And whether that's just on the breath work, whether that's getting into, veterans using meditation or psychedelics or something just to improve their own mental health. And I think it's relevant in the conversation. So, Josh, if you could explain your background, because it is not one of just the yoga practitioner who went off to India and was studying under a guru or something. So, if you could just break down what your background is, and I think it's important as we move forward.
Yeah, sure. So I spent 10 years in the Navy Special Operations community and the EOD community, so like the Navy's bomb squad. So I did that for 10 years in Virginia Beach. Recently just got out of the military at the end of 2019. And then I've been working on Stasis since then. But yeah, you're exactly right. Kind of, I saw the shift happening really in the last couple of years of my service on active duty where, just mental resiliency and kind of holistic approaches to not only performance, but like you said, mental health were becoming more okay to talk about, and like more resources were being available to guys that were interested in that stuff. One of my team members who I worked with at my last duty station is actually the person who originally introduced me to any sort of like breathing practices. And it was for physical performance. He was training to go do this kind of elite screener for the development group. And I was working out with him, and I was just kind of following some of the programming he was doing. And a lot of it was geared around specific breathing techniques and patterns that you would use as like warm-ups before you would go into exercises, but then also just like on our runs, like really being more conscious of controlling your breathing patterns, a lot of like nasal only breathing for endurance runs. And so I was very skeptical of all this at first when he introduced it to me. And then, really kind of saw an immediate benefit in my performance from the first couple of weeks of like dedicating to kind of those techniques that he was teaching me. And then after that, I just kind of became obsessed with it. And I started diving into all the research and literature around it. And that's where I was kind of, surprised to find that there were so many other aspects that breathing were really controlling and responsible for, within the body, both from a physiological standpoint, but also a psychological standpoint too. And kind of since then, I've just been, going down that wormhole, I guess,
Yeah. So anyone who's listening in, say the first time, and they're not familiar, when we talk about breath work, could you just give a quick synopsis of what you mean when you say, hey, we're going to be doing breath work?
Yeah. So I think the easiest definition and what we kind of tell people is just the conscious manipulation of your breathing patterns, right? So, you know, controlling your breathing is breath work in my standpoint. A lot of people go through their whole lives without ever consciously thinking about their breathing. It's just this subconscious thing that your autonomic nervous system is controlling. But you can actually take control of that and have, dictate kind of, what kind of response you have to certain situations or your arousal levels, depending on, certain breathing patterns and stuff like that. So yeah, it's just a conscious awareness and manipulation of your breathing patterns with a certain goal in mind.
I don't even know if this question makes sense. So you get into it and it's more on the performance side. Did you start feeling did you start noticing the other effects of it kind of immediately, and that's really the path you started to go as far as interest wise? I mean, how did that whole transformation, you go, all right, that's like an individual thing. My performance is getting better. Oh, I got this other thing that seems to be happening. What was your experience?
Yeah. So it was, that was really a few months before I got out of the military where I was starting to do that. And then as I was going through my transition process, I had a lot of personal stuff going on in my life. Obviously, the transition out of the military is a very stressful experience. I was starting a business. I was going through a divorce at the time. So I had a lot of stuff going on in my life. And at that time, I was doing all the research and kind of coming back to breath work to really help with like stress, anxiety, PTSD, depression, all this stuff. So that's when I've kind of was, awakened to that side of the breath work practices and started to implement that into my daily routine. And obviously saw a huge benefit from that as well. So that was kind of the initial stages of how that went down.
In your own experience, why do you think some of these, like I said, these worlds are mixing? Is it the traditional way that the military has been dealing with things like mental health is lacking? I mean, there has to be almost a reason. You're not the first EOD tech I've had on the podcast, and I can only imagine how stressful a job like that is. So I figure finding different outlets to try and cope with some of those stressors has to be huge. But I mean, what's your thoughts on that? The way the military traditionally does things, and then this kind of new wave of things that are entering those communities.
Yeah. Again, I think there's a lot of moving pieces and parts to that puzzle. I think a lot has to do with like the generation of guys that are in the military right now, like, younger people more open to these new ideas, I think has a huge part of it. I think that we're seeing that the traditional way of dealing with these through like pharmaceutical drugs just isn't working. So I think that has a huge play in it. And I think it's like, it's guys like me and I have a bunch of other friends that have recently gotten out that are doing things like this and like talking about it and being more open about mental health awareness and other resources available to guys that are out there. I think that has a huge impact on it. I know like when I started kind of going down that own path and talking to my close personal friends, as soon as they find out that, okay, someone else is kind of going through the same thing I am, and this is what's working for them, they're much more open to using or trying out that new resource. But I think the military is doing a much better job. Like I said, I think the leadership, is a younger generation, younger guys in those leadership positions. So they're more open to these new holistic, measurements for health and wellness. The commands that I'm seeing are bringing in yoga people and meditation and just like, and the science is there now too. So like, not only do guys want to try these new things, but there's data to back up all these claims now. Whereas I think before, specifically with like yoga and meditation, they were very esoteric in nature, and a lot of it still is. But in order to kind of to if you want to work with the military and stuff, like they want to see data behind everything. Right. So like, that's what we've tried to be like very aware of. And from the beginning, Stasis has always wanted to be grounded in science and not be esoteric at all. I think there's plenty of breathwork companies and yoga and meditation people that's their jam. We're very founded in like scientific evidence, and, you know, everything we've done so far has been grounded in research and clinical trials and stuff like that. So I think that plays a huge part of it too, is like, you know, just coming from a scientific background, specifically if you're trying to work with the military, is going to, you know, get you much farther. So it's really cool. It's really exciting time, I think, to see the military being more open-minded to all that stuff, and, you know, giving these resources that don't involve pharmaceutical drugs to the guys that really need it. So it's good.
Yeah, it is good. I agree. I think that coming in with statistics and scientifically backed things is key, right? I mean, you're certainly not going to come in there and start, you know, you're talking about breathing, and if you bust out crystals, you know, the military's out. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. You know, I had heard in another interview with you, Josh, that when Stasis first started, you guys were also looking or working with cold exposure also. Now, anyone who's heard of Wim Hof and some of the other people that talk about these things, those two a lot of times go hand in hand. And I'll be honest with you, I have not. I've dabbled in the cold exposure. I keep kicking myself for not. You know, every time I'm right at that threshold of like, oh, I'm going to do this, and then I'm like, well, maybe I'll just hold my breath instead. It's like, explain some of the science or and the techniques that go along with those two kind of combined.
Yeah, that's how Stasis got started. Is we were actually, I mean, so I originally heard of cold exposure through Wim Hof too, and that's obviously I was introduced to kind of like his breathing techniques through that platform as well. And when we first started Stasis, we actually were trying to develop like the world's first smart cold tub. It was going to be all driven off an app. And we had some partnerships with like CrossFit gyms in Virginia Beach that we were going to place our tubs in. This was all pre-pandemic. And then when the pandemic hit, you know, all the gyms shut down. So that's kind of when we pivoted to really focusing on the breathing stuff. But yeah, I love cold exposure. I in Virginia Beach, I had a sauna and a cold tub at my house in my garage. So it was awesome. I was able to do it basically on a daily basis. And there's two different things that I think you can do with cold exposure. One, you can use it as more of like a thermogenesis for like fat loss. That's like a big thing for a lot of people. That's why they do cryotherapy is huge now too. Or you can use it for like stress inoculation, right? And I think that's kind of where the bigger aspect is. And then there's also a lot of physiological benefits from inflammation and the release of a bunch of endorphins and norepinephrine and BDNF, which is like helps with neuroplasticity. So there's a lot of other benefits too, but the biggest thing that I use it personally for is that stress inoculation, just like putting yourself through consciously stressful events kind of trains the body to be able to deal with those situations better and better. And then it helps you deal with like the little stressors that life gives you, obviously, in a much better manner too. So I think that's kind of where the two big benefits that people can start to explore with cold exposure.
Yeah. Explain the breathing though, on how that's integrated in with the cold exposure.
Yeah. So putting yourself into a cold tub of water or cold showers, your body actually naturally has a stress response to that, right? Like your body doesn't want to sit in 30-degree water for long periods of time.
Right.
So that just activates that sympathetic or that like flight or flight response of your body. And in order to kind of be habituated to that and to train your body to stay calm in those situations, you pair that with slow breathing that's parasympathetic dominant. So it's going to activate that other side of the nervous system. And so when you do that, like you said, you're putting yourself in a stressful situation, but instead of reacting to that and like letting that physiological response happen, you're controlling that with these slow breathing patterns. And it's just going to get you better that way. You know, when some crazy stuff happens in real life, instead of freaking out or panicking or, you know, going into that black zone that you hear, you're able to stay calm, cool, collected, and make logical, analytical decisions in those situations, which most people aren't able to do. And you can train yourself to be better to deal with those situations through, exercise, heat exposure, cold exposure. There's all these different techniques that you can use to be better adaptable in those situations.
Yeah, it's been something I've been trying to promote because if you look at current events, if you take law enforcement incidents that have been happening when people are under immense amounts of stress, they refer to like your lizard brain, right? Like you revert back to this very basic animalistic kind of thing, and there's all kinds of. I mean, I'm not telling you this as if you don't know it. It's probably more for people listening, but the physical effects of those types of things where, you lose dexterity in your fingers, your tunnel vision, and breathing is so huge. If you've ever seen somebody in a truly stressful situation, their breathing is out of control. Now they might not even be moving, but it's fascinating to see the human response when you have that true adrenaline dump. So I foresee, I mean, the military, any of the first responders, that this has got to be something that they would really want to kind of start tapping into.
Yeah. I mean, it's so basic too. That's the thing that like kills me is it's so easy to implement these practices into your daily routine. You don't need any equipment. You can do it wherever you are, whenever you are. The average adult takes 22,000 breaths per day. So when you think about that from a lifetime standpoint and think about like if you're not breathing correctly or not kind of optimizing your breathing patterns, how much consequence that has on your daily decision-making ability, like how you feel throughout the day, your sleep, your performance. I mean, and I'm talking about performance in life, not necessarily athletics.
Right.
But yeah, it's just such an easy thing that I think people can be more aware of and start to like, put some time and effort into to changing habits or bad habits if you're doing that. So yeah, I'm excited to see what the future holds for breathing stuff. It's going to be really interesting. And we're just kind of at the beginning of the data side of it too. Like, being able to see what's happening in the body when you're actually manipulating your breathing patterns from like a data analytics standpoint. So I think, like I said, over the next 5 years, I think we're going to start to learn a lot of things around how really, I mean, we know how important breathing is, but we don't have a lot of the data to back up some of these claims yet. So when we get that, I think we're going to learn a lot of really interesting things about how much it's actually affecting people's lives.
Is there technology like does the Oura Ring or is there anything now that really you can start measuring things through or what's going on in the body during a breathing practice? Like I'm a big fan of Whoop. I've had their strap for the past year. They measure respiration rate, HRV, resting heart rate. So kind of all those basic stuff. The one thing I really do like about the Oura Ring is unlike Whoop that only gives you an HRV reading once a day, kind of first thing when you wake up. With the Oura Ring, you can actually measure HRV on a per activity level. So a lot of the members that we work with right now through Stasis are patients recovering from COVID-19 that have had a lot of respiratory and mental health issues. And it's really interesting to see some of the data that they send back where just in a small 10-minute breathing exercise window, they're seeing their heart rate variability go up as much as 20, 30 points within that 10 minutes. So a real noticeable change in a small acute window of time with your HRV. But as far as like breathing specific devices, I mean, there's a lot of like respiratory lung trainers on the market right now. A lot of our members and patients are using pulse oximeters to measure their blood saturation levels. And I'm not a huge fan of those devices actually, because I don't think they do a really good job of telling you actually what's going on in the body. But no, there's not, that's something that we're really interested in and doing a lot of research and development right now on some stuff that might be coming down the pipe. But yeah. On the mental health side of things, I started this thing because it was all about habits. It was about habits and the consequences, good or bad. And I'm really interested even on the stress reduction or even in the world of addiction. So a lot of times people are trying to escape, right? You're trying to escape out of your own brain, your own thoughts, and subconsciously you'll start, or consciously, you start self-medicating to calm those things down. I'm really curious on how these breathing techniques can be integrated into everyday life. People that are starting to feel stressed out and they have enough emotional awareness to realize there's something going on, and they're distracting themselves or doing whatever. What would a breathing session look like if you were to talk to somebody like that?
Yeah, I think the easiest place to start is, set up a daily routine or a practice that you're going to be able to stick with, because it's just like anything else. It takes time and practice and effort to implement new changes or new habits into our routines, right? The one thing I really love about breath work or breathing just in general, unlike meditation that normally takes quite a while for you to actually notice and see the benefits. And I'm a huge fan of meditation. It's a part of my daily practice. I love it. I've made so much mental growth out of meditation in the past year for me. So I'm not down talking meditation at all. I think it's definitely should be something that people explore, but it does take time and deliberate daily practice to kind of reap the benefits of that. Whereas with breathing, like I think anyone can do a 10-minute breathing session and notice like you're going to feel different from when you started and when you ended that 10-minute session. So I think that's like the real power of breath work, is like the immediate kind of satisfaction you get out of it. But yeah, like 10 minutes, 5 minutes of just slow nasal only breathing. So breathing in and out through your nose and really focusing on filling the lungs up to a max capacity, using the diaphragm. A lot of people will find themselves to be more of these shallow upper chest breathers, where they're not actually using the diaphragm and getting lungs into the deepest part of or getting the air down into the deepest part of our lungs, which is really important. So 80% of that blood gas exchange process that happens in the lower 1/3 part of your lungs. So most people are never actually kind of utilizing that. That's also like there's nerve endings of that parasympathetic branch of the nervous system that are attached to the lower part of our lungs. So just deep diaphragmatic breathing pattern is very important that most people don't do. Paying special emphasis to the exhale. So I would always recommend that people, especially if you're looking to do it as like a calming, relaxing practice, you always want to have the exhale be a little bit longer than the inhale. So when you look at the breath cycle, both of those pieces are tied to that nervous system as well. And you can see this in real time if you monitor your heart rate when you're doing breathing exercises. You'll notice on the inhale portion, your heart rate's going to go up a couple beats per minute. So when you inhale, that's actually activating that sympathetic side of the nervous system. And then on the exhale, heart rate's going to drop back down. That's that parasympathetic branch being activated on the exhale. So a good breathing pattern that I would recommend people get started with, in through the nose, out through the nose, 4-second inhale, 6-second exhale. That's kind of been found in a bunch of clinical studies to be the optimal respiration rate between 5.5 and 6.5 breaths per minute. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where we get started. I think that's the easiest thing that people can kind of get started with. And then depending on where they are physically and mentally, if that breathing pattern is either too difficult or too easy, you can start to manipulate those numbers and, maybe you bump the exhale up to 8 or 10 seconds if that feels comfortable. And then, you can just progress from there.
You mentioned meditation. I know for me, and I've said it on here before, but those two go so hand in hand, right? So I'm ADD and I have a very hard time with just say following my breath. And I know everyone I talk to, especially when they first start meditation, they say the same thing. But it's through this breath work, and I don't know what your thoughts are on that, like a Wim Hof method, where on that exhale you hold your breath, But I know after a session like that, it is so much easier for me to get into a state where I can truly kind of be still in my brain and kind of just concentrate on the things that I really try to concentrate when I'm meditating. I don't know. What's your experience with that? And is that something you promote also with the actual holding of the breath at all?
Yeah. So we do a lot of like apnea work, breath holding work in most of our programs. I think it all depends on who the client or patient is that we're working with. I mean, the majority of people that we work with right now, like I said, are COVID-19
so you're not,
patients.
Yeah,
so we're not doing any kind of hyperventilation work or Wim Hof style breathing with them. It's more slow, parasympathetic dominant routines, but we do incorporate a lot of apnea work too, just to build up their CO2 tolerance. So that's been something that we've actually recently seen. We're partnered with Mount Sinai Hospital, which is a really large hospital up in New York, and they have probably, if not the best, one of the best post-COVID care clinics right now in the world that we work with. And we're in some like early stages of actual, like they're doing some clinical tests and trials. But what we found is like a lot of these patients have very low CO2 limits in their breath on the exhale. And we think that's a major factor in a lot of the symptoms that they're experiencing. So one of the things we work on them with is apnea holds to start to increase that CO2 in their system. And there's a lot of other factors at play. A lot of these people are habitual mouth breathers,
right.
Hyperventilating. So rapid shallow breaths, which exhales a lot more CO2 than if you were slow nasal breathing as well. As far as the meditation goes, yeah, I mean, it's a staple. I use Headspace, the app is what I use for meditating. And I mean, breathing is kind of the core of their program. Whenever you go into a meditation center, that's what your anchor is your breath. Where I don't think they do a good job is they don't really educate people on the proper way to breathe or kind of why they're asking you to breathe in these certain patterns or anything like that. But yeah, I think breathing can be a great place for people to start with when they're diving into meditation, just because you get both aspects of it with breath work. I think you get the benefits of the actual breathing exercises, but then also you get the practice of just being mindful of your breathing while you're doing it. And that can be a great kind of entry level position, I think, for people to dive into some more deeper meditation practice. Whereas a lot of people get themselves into trouble when they try to go that meditation route, is I think they try it for a couple of days. Like I said, they don't notice anything. So it's kind of off to the next thing. But yeah, it's a great place to start.
You mentioned mouth breathers. What's the science behind it? Because it's not the first time I've heard it, but what's the science behind the benefits of just nasal breathing?
Yeah, so there's a ton. I mean, one, your nose was just biologically put on your body to breathe. So there's that. Your mouth was put on your body to chew food from and to swallow water. The biggest things that we see with our members specifically, so there's a bunch of things. Nasal breathing, I mean, naturally it warms, humidifies the air. It can stop a lot of pathogens and bacteria, your nasal hairs. You naturally produce a gas called nitric oxide in your nasal passages too, which is a vasodilator. So it opens up kind of your airways and helps deliver and utilize more oxygen. But also it just, it naturally allows you to use your diaphragm and to do that deep diaphragmatic breathing easier. Whereas when you breathe through your mouth, it kind of, you notice like it automatically activates this upper chest area. The biggest thing is the diameter of the airways, right? So your mouth is a much larger volume of air. You can breathe in and breathe out a much volume of air through your mouth. So what happens is a lot of people over breathe for what their metabolic needs of their body are, specifically if they're living a mainly, sedentary lifestyle and they're not getting a lot of exercise. You can actually breathe more and have negative consequences by doing that, then if you were just to switch to nasal breathing, the volume of air that you're going to be able to move is much smaller.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. The CO2 plays a huge factor. When you breathe out through your mouth specifically, you end up off-gassing a lot more CO2 than you would by breathing through your nose. Decreases your CO2 tolerance, which makes you more susceptible to like stress, anxiety, and all these other mental health factors too. So it's a good place to start, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah. I tell you, I know I'd never heard it called apnea, but I'm assuming that's just where you're breathing and then you're holding your breath for periods of time. And that brings over a level of, I mean, it's almost like a natural high. Like it is literally like a level of calmness when you're done with something like that. That I try to explain it to people. My wife thinks I'm nuts because I'll go downstairs in my basement and it can be loud, right? When you're breathing down and I'll come up and I'll feel fantastic, but they're all just, my family's convinced I think it's just from a lack of oxygen for a period of time. But I don't know the science behind it. I don't know why it works, but I do know, man, I come upstairs feeling way different than I went downstairs. And I'm going to lean on you to explain exactly why that is. Do you know why that is?
I'm assuming you're talking about more of like Wim Hof breathing practice, right?
Yeah. I've seen him. There's another guy and I forget his name. I've seen him on YouTube. He looks like he's like 50 years old, long hair. I'm going to say 2% body fat, but he goes out there. I mean, I always close the computer when somebody's walking by, and I'm watching this guy because he looks like Tarzan, just older. But they talk about it almost being like a way to kind of naturally get into this relaxed state, something that usually people would use a chemical or something for. So long story, yes.
Yeah, I think it goes to like the holotropic breath work, right? And so what's actually happening there is you're actually like super oxygenating all of your body and your bloodstream. Because by doing that kind of rapid hyperventilation breathing pattern, you're getting rid of all the CO2 and making more room for oxygen molecules. So you're actually changing the chemistry of your blood and making it more alkaline. And so that's kind of like that. I believe that's that the entry of the euphoric feeling, and you get that tingly and especially in your extremities. And then you add the apnea hold to that. And so you have all this super rich oxygenated blood, right? So you're able to hold your breath for much longer periods of time when you pre-breathe like that, because you don't have any CO2 in your system. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand either, is when you hold your breath or apnea, the urge to breathe doesn't come first from a lack of oxygen. It actually comes from an increase in CO2. So whenever you hold your breath, that first feeling you get where you're like, okay, I need to take another breath, you have plenty of oxygen in your system at that point. It's actually just a rising levels of CO2, which is, it kind of acts as like the stress mechanism of the body, or the messenger. In your brain, you have these transmitters that are actually, responsible for kind of telling you, okay, it's time to make a new breath. And while those CO2 levels are building, that's kind of what's causing you to want to take that breath. But you can train it, kind of like you're talking about, by doing more apnea holds or increasing your CO2 tolerance. And so I think it comes down to like, one, the change in the chemistry of your blood is what's causing that euphoric good feeling. And then two, you're becoming more adaptable to stress by the increasing levels of CO2 in your body.
Yeah. This is going back a long time, but I had tried out for Air Force Combat Control, and they were, you do a lot of underwater stuff in the pool, and we used to, obviously I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but we would hyperventilate before you were going to do an underwater. And that was one of the things they tell you, like, if it starts to feel really good, you're going to want to come up because you're about to, they call it the wizard. You're about to meet the wizard at the bottom of the pool because you're about to black out. That whole process to me is crazy. How, you get that euphoric feeling before, you're going to black out. But
yeah, I think that's one of the negative things of the hyperventilation is because you're starting off at such a low level of CO2 is that it creeps up on you very fast. Where like if you were normally not going to hyperventilate and just hold your breath, you have these kind of like indicators that your body's going through, whereas you're not really getting that with that pre-breathing hyperventilation work.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can sneak out. I think that's why it's not like recommended in underwater swimming and kind of stuff like that. But it's utilized by a lot of like free divers and stuff as part of their pre-breathing routine, just because it makes sense from a physiological standpoint to do it.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to promote that because there's been, I mean, even within the past couple of years, there's just been some absolute tragedies within the military world from guys working on those things.
Swim with a buddy.
yeah, and even that sometimes I think it was just a couple of years ago they lost a couple of Navy guys that were training together in the pool. But I think that the shift for Stasis with COVID is it's interesting. How did that come to be? Like, how did you guys make that transition?
Yeah, so we were working with a neuroscientist out of Mount Sinai Hospital in New York with the cold tubs. So we were kind of already working with someone out of the hospital when we were trying to develop the cold tubs. And then, like I said, when the pandemic hit, we knew this was going to be pretty early on. They knew, doctors knew it was going to be a huge respiratory issue for a lot of people. We were seeing that very early on in COVID. A lot of inflammation in the lungs, shortness of breath, kind of all these symptoms that were, pointing us towards this being a breathing opportunity or kind of disease. And then, so through that relationship with Dr. David Petrino is his name through Mount Sinai, I kind of told him my thoughts on it. I was like, hey, I think the same breathwork stuff that we're kind of already doing and have been doing for a while now can help these patients recover from COVID. After we went through some of the research and stuff with him, he agreed. He set up a small little pilot program with the hospital where I worked one-on-one with some of these patients for a couple of weeks. And at the end of that, it went really well. They all reported, alleviation in kind of a lot of the symptoms that they're experiencing. So we knew we were onto something then, and then, made some iterations to the program and to the product. And then a couple of months later, we had an official partnership with the hospital and launched at the end of July. And since then, we're just at 1,000 patients that we've worked with now from all across the country and the world. I mean, a lot of people in the UK, Australia, Canada that we've been working with. So it's been a really interesting 12 months for myself personally and for the company as well.
I'm sure. So how does that look? Somebody who's recovering from COVID who hears this, they're interested in partaking. What's the process? How do they make that happen?
Yeah, they can just go onto our website, stasisperformance.com. They can sign up for a free account and get access to kind of all the programs and content that we have on the website. We also offer a couple times a week a free 1-hour onboarding session. So that's led by me, and then through that they'll kind of get introduced to our philosophy around breathing. We'll teach them, kind of our 3 pillars of how we teach functional breathing. And then they go after that session, they kind of are educated. They know how we want them to breathe. And then they get a follow-up program that has daily breathing exercises in it that they follow at home. And then, right now we're in the process of raising our first little bit of outside funding for the company, and we're turning all this into a mobile application. So it'll be very much better user experience, and you'll be able to kind of monitor your progress and patient monitoring and eventually we'll be able to, show a lot of really cool stuff on the data side, like we talked about earlier. So we're super excited about that. But yeah, that's the easiest way to get started. Just go sign up for a session on the website. It's all free.
Cool. Yeah, that was my next question is this seems prime for some type of app or subscription or something that, do you have people reach out to you that are just on the anxiety or the addiction issues looking for help?
Yeah, just recently we've started to get a lot of people that are coming to us not from that COVID world specifically. So yeah, actually a lot of younger children. So people that we've like mothers or fathers that we've been working with that have been recovering from COVID that have kids that are just dealing with like stress and anxiety from the current climate of the world right now that we've started working with. So that's been super cool. We have, we're in early conversations with a lot of special operations community within the DoD to offer some programs and stuff for them that we're super excited about. But yeah, so we have offerings too for people outside of like the COVID recovery program too on the website. They can sign up for just a general health and wellness onboarding program. We have lots of breathing programs for them too. So definitely, if they're interested in that, we have options available for them as well.
Josh, I'm for sure going to be pointing some people in your direction. We're just starting a nonprofit now, and with the whole goal of not just first responders and veterans, but it's going to be a big part of the people we're helping. And this is the exact kind of stuff we're looking for, right? It's just changing whatever habit you can, whether it be a breathing pattern, picking up new habits, and just trying to find ways to add value to your life and get through those uncomfortable times. Like I said, when you're kind of struggling and things aren't going your way, be able to take some time, do a breathing exercise, and hopefully just kind of work your way through without leaning on some of the same things that aren't serving you that you've done in the past. If you could, you mentioned what somebody does for COVID. For you personally, how often during the day, and I'm not talking about just being aware of your breathing, but actually going through, say, a 10-minute routine, what does that look like for you? And how often are you doing that throughout the day?
Yeah. So, a lot. It's a definitely pre-bed or so like first thing in the morning routine. Normally I will wake up, I'll do meditation for 10 or 20 minutes, depending on the day, kind of how much time I have. And then I'll always go into like a Wim Hof style kind of hyperventilation routine. That normally only takes me five or so minutes to do. I'll jump in right now, and down in Florida, I don't have my cold tub here, but I have a pool that the water's fairly cold. So I'll jump in there. And then immediately after that, I'll do a 10-minute kind of parasympathetic down regulation breathing routine, which is just very slow kind of cadence breathing. So that'll be like the first thing in the morning. And then I'll always do some sort of like warm up breathing routine before I either work out or go on a run. I'll do a couple things with that. Normally, again, some sort of like hyperventilation style breathing just to activate, get my heart rate up, get my body temperature up. And then I'll normally do some sort of like simulated high altitude training. So just a lot of back-to-back apnea holds to drop my blood saturation levels below 85 or 80% is the goal. And I'll monitor that with the pulse oximeter. And what happens when you do that is your spleen releases a bunch of super rich oxygenation blood cells. So it's the same thing that happens when you go and train at altitude. You're just increasing red blood cell counts. And you can do that at sea level just by doing apnea holds. So I'll normally do that. And then before I go to bed at night, I'll do another just kind of down regulation, slow breathing cadence, like in bed right before I go to sleep, just to kind of really relax and chill and drop their heart rate and clear the mind of anything that's, kind of in there washing around throughout the day. So normally definitely 2 sessions, 3 sessions most of the time. One of those is workout related. The other 2 are morning and evening routines.
Yeah, and that's one of the benefits I heard you talk about on another podcast was the sleep side. And I think there's so many of us suffering right now with you mentioned the stressors of this past year, and a lot of people are dealing with some financial things. Explain that, or at least talk about some of the effects this has on your sleep.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the same thing. That's one of the most probably common reported things that we hear from our members with COVID, that there is just an increase in their ability to get good quality sleep, which obviously has such a huge impact on your recovery in general for anyone. Sleep is probably the most important thing that you could start to pay attention to if you're not optimizing, or if you're not performing how you want to perform. I'm sure it starts with sleep. But it's the same thing. Like, a lot of people go to bed super jacked up, they're in a more sympathetic dominant state of their nervous system, and that doesn't allow you to sleep good or get quality deep sleep. So when you shift that, and lower your arousal levels is really what, from a scientific kind of standpoint, the term, you get better sleep. Your heart rate variability increases, you lower your resting heart rate. It calms the mind too. So it's just very basic, simple stuff that people can start to utilize.
Cool, man. If people want to, if they want to learn more, they want to follow you guys, where can they find you?
So the website, stasisperformance.com. We're on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, all at Stasis Performance. And then I'm at Josh Duntz on all social media platforms as well.
Cool. Hey, I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm serious. As I get the Consequence of Habit nonprofit up and running, this is the exact kind of stuff we're interested in. So I'm definitely going to be sending some people your way, and I'm going to be in touch with you. I'm excited to see where this thing goes, man. Really, I think it's important stuff. That's it for me. Unless you got something else you want to talk about, Josh.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, I would love to work with the nonprofit as well. That's obviously, when I just real quick, I guess when I left the military, I was obviously looking for like what that next, as cliche as it sounds, next mission is going to be. But, and this has been really, really helpful for me in my transition process, because I'm actually getting to see an impact in how I'm, changing people's lives and stuff, which is super cool. So yeah, I would happy to kind of help out for anyone else that's listening to, nonprofit wise or whatever. We're here to help people perform better and get better mental health. So thanks so much for having me on.
It's one last thing. It's interesting that you found this at a time, like you said, that like you had a lot of things. Sounds like you had a lot of things ending, right? You had your time in the military, relationship. And that's a stressful time. So it's not, what a great thing to have this, not a crutch, but this benefit of learning about something that not only, like you said, helps you, but the effects of helping other people, man. I think that is one of the biggest things to help people go through stressful times. So if you feel you're adding a benefit or doing something for somebody else, it's a game changer for sure.
100%. I mean, the biggest, like, I remember the day, like it was yesterday, when I started seeing a therapist the last couple of years I was in the military, and that was like very taboo, right? At the time, like not a lot of guys were talking about it. No one wanted to be pulled off the team because you had PTSD or whatever. And it changed my life for sure. And like I said, talking to some of my close friends about that. And then a couple of weeks later, them coming up to me and being like, hey man, I went and talked to the therapist. I feel so much better. I would have never done this if you hadn't talked to me about it. That means so much to me, like you said, I think that really helps people out. It helped me out. I was in a tough situation, but like knowing that your kind of courage or, whatever, vulnerability, willingness to talk about these tough subjects that specifically like macho military men don't want to talk about very often, can have such a huge impact on other people's lives, specifically people that you are close to and care about. that's it for me. Like that makes it so worth it.
Yeah, I've had these conversations. I've had a lot of them, right, with people that come from that type A personality or those career fields where admitting any of this stuff was traditionally considered a weakness. Even when I quit drinking, I would get clowned by my buddies at the bar, and then you'd get a phone call on the way home, like, "Hey, how did you do it?" And I would have these conversations with people, and they go, "Well, I don't want to actually admit I have like an issue. I'd like to be able to call you about it," because they thought of it as a weakness. I'm like, man, being a responsible adult, man or woman, it takes courage to actually face your problems instead of keep pushing them down and hiding them and do like that's a weakness. Like continue to do what you're doing that's not working. That's a weakness. It takes strength to actually do something about it, man. So, and this is a great tool for it. I know it's helped me. I can tell when I haven't done it for a period of time. Like I'll just go like, oh man, it's been like a week and a half. I haven't done any of the breathing stuff, and as soon as I do it, I'm like, oh, that's why I was doing it. It makes a substantial difference. So thanks again, Josh. I appreciate you what you guys are doing. Like I said, I look forward to see the direction this thing's going. I hope it's incorporated. We could sit here all day and talk about all of the different fields where I think this would just be a huge benefit for people. But I think that's just going to happen organically as people start to see the benefits. So that's it, man. Have a good one.
For sure. Awesome. Thank you again so much for having me on.
All right. Hey, that's a wrap, everybody. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Please check out the website. Please spread the word of the Consequence of Habit podcast. Let's get more of these stories out to everybody, and I will see you next week.